All right, thank you for joining us today on Category 3 Codes and Documentation Submission. My name is Mary Stu Gardner, and I'm a registered nurse on the Provider Outreach and Education team. And I'm going to be your facilitator for today's event. I'm also joined by Jennifer from the Provider Outreach and Education Department, as well as Dr. Shaning, our CMD that actually is in charge of the Category 3 codes. My objective for today is that you learn how to properly submit Category 3 codes with accurate documentation to help ensure accurate pricing for you and minimize the risk of denials. And we're going to accomplish this today by defining Category 3 codes. We're going to discuss documentation to support your submissions, and we'll talk about proper submission, as well as I'm going to go through a bunch of resources. Please note that we do have legal disclaimers to our presentation, and those disclaimers are located at the end of the presentation, and by staying on, you agree to those disclaimers as well. So what are Category 3 codes? Well, Category 3 codes are a set of temporary codes for tracking new and emerging technologies and services and procedures that have not yet met the criteria for permanent Category 1 codes. They consist of 4 numeric characters followed by the letter T and are used for data collection to justify further widespread use or to aid in FDA approval processes. These codes are released biannually by the American Medical Association, or the AMA. So Category 3 codes were created to track utilization of emerging technologies, services, and procedures. They're not grouped by service types, like they're not grouped by anesthesia or surgery or radiology, etc. Instead, they're assigned in sequential number order. So some key characteristics of Category 3 codes: they are temporary. They're used for a limited amount of time, which could be actually up to 5 years, while the technology or procedure is being evaluated. Another characteristic is they're used for data collection. So their primary purpose is to collect data on the usage and effectiveness of that new or emerging service. A third characteristic is the structure of them. Again, like I mentioned, they're a unique 4-digit and 1-letter structure, which is 4 numbers followed by the letter T. And then the purpose, again, to track that emerging technology and procedures and determine if they should be promoted to a permanent Category 1 code, which are for established service. So they're a replacement for an unlisted code. If a Category 3 code is available for a specific technology, it must be used instead of one of those unlisted or 99 codes. So they can also be referred to or otherwise known as Cat 3 or T codes, as some slang terms that I hear for them in use as well. So what happens to a Category 3 code? The ultimate goal of it is that it's going to be promoted to a Category 1. So if the service or the technology meets the criteria for a permanent Category 1 code, the Category 3 would be removed and then replaced by a Category 1. But it can also be removed. A Category 3 code can also or will be removed from the code set if the technology or the service isn't widely used or it's actually proven to be ineffective. So let's move on and discuss what it takes to be medically necessary in accordance with Medicare standards. So on this slide, you're going to see how Medicare defines medical necessity. And I bring this up because before Medicare covers anything, it has to meet medical necessity standards. So that means it has to be safe and effective. It can't be experimental or an item or service of convenience. It has to be necessary and consistent with general medical standards. And moving to the next slide, it has to meet FDA approval for marketing. So if an item or a service is not approved for marketing by the FDA, it is considered investigational, and therefore it doesn't meet medical necessity requirements. That means there'll be no payment by Medicare for non-FDA approved devices. Now, I bring this up to help you better understand, what these Category 3 codes are. And remember, Category 3 codes, they're temporary codes. They're for tracking new and emerging technologies and procedures. They have not yet met the permanent Category 1 criteria, but they still need to meet medical necessity and FDA approval. So moving on, let's talk about our LCDs for Category 3. So the title of this slide is actually linked to our LCD, which I'm going to jump out to in just a little bit. As part of any LCD, you're going to find coverage guidelines, indications, limitations, summary of evidence for some of the codes, as well as utilization guidelines, because this LCD doesn't contain all of the Category 3 codes. So let's jump out and take a quick look at what we have out here. And I'm going to use the link available. Give me just a second as this pulls up. And I will pull this into view for you. All right. So after accepting the licensing agreement, I routed you from the PowerPoint straight into the LCD for Category 3 codes. When you go into an LCD, there's some important things to think about when you go in. Make sure that you expand the contractor information, and make sure it is an LCD that is a WPS LCD. If we are your Medicare paying and processing contractor, you should be following our LCD, not another contractor's. So that's one thing. Now, I routed you again straight to the LCD page, but what if you don't have that PowerPoint available anymore? Well, how do you know where to go? You can go to cms.gov, and this is their homepage for CMS. And I'm going to use the drop down for Medicare. I'm going to go to coverage, and I'm going to go to the Medicare coverage database. And here's where I can search for LCDs. And I'm going to type in Category 3, and you're going to see that it comes up as there's a WPS one here. But if other contractors had ones available, there may be other contractors available here. So the easiest way I tell providers is choose your state. Choose your WPS state that you're part of. I'm just going to choose Iowa because that's the first WPS state that I saw. And then I'm going to select the LCD. Again, I'm going to check, make sure it's a WPS LCD. Okay, so that's just a quick tutorial on how to find them in the absence of you having that PowerPoint available to you. So information about the LCD itself, including the effective dates, review notification periods, etc., is all up here at the beginning. And then as well as information about where you can find different information on the CMS's site, et cetera, that drives coverage. But then we go into the coverage guidelines, and this is where I want you to make sure you're following the coverage guidelines for your Category 3 codes. Now, this just gives some general coverage guidelines at the beginning of this LCD for all Category 3 codes. But then as we move down into the summary of evidence, we break this down into some specific Category 3 codes that we know that we generally have problems here with at WPS, and we wanted to make sure we give you more information and more guidelines to follow. So that's why those are included. So you can see there's cerebral perfusion, and as we scroll down, there's some intracardiac monitoring systems, etc. As you keep scrolling through any LCD, you have some information about the analysis of the evidence, so the rationale that we use for our determinations, and then general information about the LCD, in this case, the Category 3 codes themselves. So most of the slides were developed off of the things that are, you know, really a highlight in this LCD that I wanted to make sure that you knew. But as you scroll down, and I'm going to scroll fast, and this is revisions, and I'm going to keep going. The nice part about LCDs is they also link you to local coverage articles, which are billing and coding articles on that service. So again, for those CPT codes, for those Category 3 CPT codes that are in our local coverage determination, we have information in the local coverage article about billing and coding those. So I do encourage you, if you use any of these CPT codes, these Category 3 CPT codes, that you are paying good attention to how they can be billed and any indications and limitations. And then there's some documentation guidelines in here, etc. And I'm not going to go into great detail about those, but I just wanted to show you where you could find that information and what you're going to find within that information. All right. So as we go back to this PowerPoint presentation, whoops. Let's go to the next slide. And I want to let you know where you can find most recent information about the Category 3 codes. Those are actually contained on the AMA CPT website, which I also linked on this slide. And we're also going to click on that link and show you about these Category 3 codes. So this website is where you're going to find the biannual electronic release of those Category 3 codes. They come out biannually in January and July. So the next release should be coming, you know, within the next several days. I'm going to go out here. Take just a second. I'm going to say no thanks to that. But I'm going to click on the Category 3 code long descriptors list and show you what's listed. So on this list, you're going to find the code, you're going to find the long descriptor of the code. I'm just going to scroll down and show you like the first several that are on the list. The long descriptor, it's important for you to know if you don't know anything about the code and you want to make sure you're selecting the correct one. You're going to want to make sure then you're reading the full code descriptor. You might have used this code several times, so you might not need to see the long descriptor, and you could go to a short descriptor list. But again, if it's something new to you, I highly encourage you to go out to the long descriptor list to make sure you're not missing anything about the description and use of this code. So again, this is just the big long description of the code. And then it goes into when it was released to the AMA website, if there's been any revisions, the effective date, any revisions, and the publication that it's currently part of. So you can see that we now have information, and it's in the 2026 and going to be in the 2027 code list. And this was just updated December 30th of 2025. So it was updated today. And that's one reason why I switched back to this, because the last one I was looking at earlier today, they didn't have the updates out here and available yet. So this still said 2026, but you can see we have information and effective dates. They're in the 2026, and they will be part of the 2027 CPT manuals as well. All right. If there was changes, and I'll scroll back to this, it tells you a little bit about the changes. And usually this just means, you know, they're non-significant changes. Maybe they forgot an or, an and, or maybe they deleted a few words, which they'll usually highlight in there if they did. Like in this, if they deleted some words, then they'll let you know what those changes were as well. All right, let's move back to the PowerPoint and move on. And we're going to talk about routine costs associated with these codes. So routine costs in Category 3, or T codes, refer to standard non-investigational services like office visits or labs or imaging that are bundled with those emerging technologies or procedures for tracking codes, but these are specific to the T code services themselves. It's usually considered investigational or experimental, requiring payer-specific policies and sometimes robust documentation. So there's notes, sometimes necessary letters to prove the medical necessity of coverage, as these codes, again, are new to track emerging technologies. They're not established, and payment isn't automatic. So some of the things that are included in your routine costs. So items and services that are typically provided absent of a clinical trial. Example, conventional care. Items or services that are required solely for the provision of the investigational item or service itself. So for example, administration of non-covered chemotherapeutic agents. So the clinically appropriate monitoring of the effects of that item or service or the prevention of complications from it. Next would be items or services needed for reasonable and necessary care that's arising from the provision of an investigational item or service, in particular for the diagnosis or treatment of complications. And then finally, reasonable and necessary items that are used to diagnose and treat complications that arise from participation in clinical trials are also covered. And that's like applicable deductibles and coinsurance rules. Those things apply to clinical trial items and services. Now let's move on and talk about what's not included in routine costs. So routine costs do not include the investigational item or service itself unless it's otherwise covered outside the clinical trial. Items or services that are provided solely to satisfy data collection and analysis, and those needs that are not used in like direct clinical management of the patient. So example, monthly CT scans for a condition that usually only requires a single scan. So just to keep doing them monthly over and over, you know, those things are not included and not part of routine costs. Items or services that are customarily provided by the research sponsor, free of charge for any enrollees in the clinical trial, are also not included. All right. Not all Category 3 codes that we review and price have issues or errors associated. Some are priced and analoged and sent quickly to the payment floor, while others, like those that are new, may require like a more extensive review on our end before they can be priced. So on the next few slides, we're going to review some of those codes that we are seeing routine or repeat issues with. All right, the first Category 3 code we see issues and errors with is for leadless pacemakers. So Medicare coverage for leadless pacemakers is only allowed under coverage with evidence development, or CED, when that procedure is performed in an FDA-approved site, and there's an NCD on that, that's NCD 20.8.4 for leadless pacemakers. So providers can find more information on approved leadless pacemaker clinical studies on CMS's website. And I'm actually going to put that link into the chat for you, just so you have it if you want it. So we at WPS, we've been noticing some incorrect billing by providers in regards to programming the device, evaluation, adjustment codes for these leadless pacemakers that were implanted under the purview of NCD 20.8.4. So again, that's going to lead you back to information on the Category 3 codes and those CPTs associated, which are the 0804T and the 0826T, which are listed here on this slide for you. So a link to the NCD is on the resource page of your slide deck, which is later on in this presentation. So again, these procedures would only be covered as routine costs of a qualifying clinical trial per the NCD 310.1, which is that routine cost in clinical trials. And that, again, is also linked here for you. There is a link on the slide that also is going to take you to an article on our website regarding this issue, and that's this link up here, the appropriate billing of Category 3 codes. I'm going to jump to that and show you. Since we have had issues, we do have an article out there that you can find on our website. And regardless of your jurisdiction, J5 or J8, A or B, you're going to be able to find this article. If you are a provider of this service, I do encourage you to please go out and review this article in full, as it's going to give you not only links to additional resources, but it's going to give you some guidelines on participating in the clinical trials, your general billing requirements, mandatory reporting for your clinical trial numbers, etc. So again, if this is an item or service that you are providing, I do encourage you to go out and take a look at that. So as we move on, the next Category 3 code that we've seen issues or errors with more often is the digitization of microscope slides. I am tongue-tied today. So this code actually describes the clinical staff work that's performed to scan and digitize items from glass microscope slides for immediate or later pathological diagnosis. So it's an add-on code, specifically describing digitization of that slide. So this code that I have listed here is the one that's seen most often, but it's not the only code that we've seen used. There's a plethora of different T codes that range from the 0751T, 0752T, 54T, 55, 56, 57, 58, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, the 0827T to 0857T. So these all kind of fall in the same grouping with the digitization of the microscope slides. Upon our review staff is reporting that providers are putting some standardized language in their documentation, which really is not supporting the medical necessity of needing to digitize that slide. So what's happening is that we're seeing all slides are being digitized for archive purposes, and the provider is not adding any information about any specific medical needs for that patient. So for instance, if the slide needs amplification of an image to enhance it and make that diagnosis, that could be a possible reason to digitize the slide and to ask for additional Medicare money with that add-on code. Maybe it's for something that can't be seen under a microscope and they need to enhance it even more. That would be another reason, you know. Or maybe there needs to be consult and different expert diagnoses, but just making a standard statement for all slides to be digitized is not reasonable and necessary. So if you're doing that and you're just doing it for routine purposes because you're digitizing all your slides, then you shouldn't be adding that additional add-on code and reporting that on your claim. You should only be asking us for money for a digitized slide when it's something that requires the slide to be digitized and your documentation supports the need for doing that. Then we could consider it for coverage of your services. All right, so the next code that we're seeing issues with under category 3 is intraocular non-biodegradable drug-eluting systems. So that's a mouthful. In these, we're finding we're paying about half, and half of them we're just not paying. One of the reasons we're not is because we're finding it's being combined with the MIGS procedure, so the micro-invasive glaucoma surgery. So I've attached the link on this LCD on the slide that you can use and refer to the coverage criteria and limitations of coverage for the MIGS procedures. Basically, iDose at the same time as a MIGS is not reasonable and necessary per the LCD. Also, remember for the 0660T, the metallic implant that contains the drug in that slow dose to reduce interocular pressure, that's an actual once-in-a-lifetime system that can be reported. All right, so moving on. Let's start wrapping things up today with some tips that can help you with your Category 3 codes, including documentation. If you report Category 3 codes and the ADR is issued so we can review and price it for you, you must respond to that within 45 days of that ADR being issued. If you don't, your claim will automatically deny for no documentation received. Remember, some codes we have analogged already to a contractor price, and they may not require review. So all codes may not require a review, but if we do request it, you have to respond. And we're going to kind of go back and forth on some things as well. So payment does not determine coverage. And what I mean by this is just because we pay you once doesn't mean we're going to pay all of your claims with that same category 3 code on it. It doesn't mean they're all good. Each is an individual review, and medical necessity for that patient on that day is the driving factor. The pricing determination nor the coverage of one claim does not set precedents for all claims. Again, it needs to be individualized to your specific patient and their needs for that item or service. Remember, similar claims may also pay differently because they're closer related to a different code. Therefore, they may get paid at a different price. And depending on the verbiage of the code and the services that are provided at the same time, they may pay different because they cannot pay with another, maybe they can't pay with another code, or maybe they are included in a different code. For example, like a procedure plus a sonogram, we may carve out part of that payment if it's an included price. When you bill this, we don't just look at your category 3 code. We have to look at all the codes that are billed, even if they're on a separate bill, because we need to determine if it should be part of something else. For example, ultrasound guidance may be included in another code that you are billing on that same date. So you need to refer to the CPT billing manual, because there are codes that should not be billed together. As a provider of Medicare services, it is your responsibility to, as that provider, to refer to those resources like the CPT manual, the AMA website, procedure to procedure code edits, to determine what codes can and cannot be billed together. Now, when it comes down to your documentation, you really need to submit all documentation to support that technology or service. Very often, we only get the op report. We need the info of why the procedure needs to be done, and generally the op report itself doesn't establish this need, doesn't establish medical necessity. So you should be submitting things like history and physical, office notes, progress reports, etc. Anything that you can provide to support that medical necessity. Also, remember, sometimes this information is not located in your facility. But if you are the facility that's billing for this service, you will need to contact the office and get as much documentation as necessary to support it as medically reasonable and necessary. Again, some of those things usually include office notes, they include H&P, they include progress reports. Now, each of your claims must be individualized to each patient. If it's not, it may appear to be cloned documentation. Cloned documentation does not establish medical necessity for that patient on that day. If you are using pre-typed procedure forms that always say the same thing, and maybe the only thing that changes is like which eye and the name of the patient, You're not establishing medical necessity for your individual patient. Cloned documentation can lead to denials, and it will eventually lead to denials once we find it. And it even is looked upon by Medicare as fraud. So Medicare considers this a misrepresentation and perhaps, like I said, a form of fraud. So that's going to potentially result in significant financial penalties if we find it to be fraud. So providers must ensure each note details that visit, the unique findings for that patient. Even when your electronic health record feature has like autofill or templates available, you need to make sure they're individualized to your patient. So I'm going to provide a link in the chat to an article on CMS's site that I actually just came across today, and that's why it's not included. And it walks you through some program integrity issues that can actually be found with using some of these automated features in your electronic health record, like the copy and paste or the autofill or the bring forward. And it walks you through why some of those are actually frowned upon using, even though it's built into your system. And again, it's because it lends its way to fraud. How do we find a lot of Medicare fraud? We start seeing repetitive things coming in that all look the same. And pretty soon we refer that to the program integrity contractor, and they look into it and they open an investigation. And the next thing we know, the site doesn't even exist and there's Medicare fraud going on. And we don't want you to possibly start into that process of having a referral and a possible investigation when it's really just a matter of making sure that all your documentation is individualized to your specific patient. Someone had brought up a question a couple of times in the pre-submitted question and asked about the acronym MEET in documentation. So the MEET acronym refers to monitor, evaluate, assess or address, and treat. And, you know, that's kind of general healthcare information. And if that's how you're documenting, that's fine. Just make sure that your documentation, you know, lets us know about that patient's specific symptoms. If there's a disease, the disease progression, that's all part of your monitoring. You're evaluating your assessments. We need to see the effectiveness or the ineffectiveness of what was used prior before you picked, you know, this category 3 item or service or device. We need to see the information about how you are assessing or addressing the issue. You're discussing the condition, how you're counseling your patient, how you're reviewing their records. And finally, you know, how this investigational device or this device, category 3 device, is going to be used for treating the patient. So what's being prescribed? What's being planned? Is there additional surgeries or medications, et cetera, that are going to be part of this patient's overall treatment plan? Or is the device or whatever that you're using, is that the treatment? So again, the MEET acronym for documentation is a great way to document as long as you're using all of the components of it and you're addressing all of those components within your documentation, and you are making it individualized to your specific patient. All right, so as we move forward, I said at the beginning, some slides have resources on them, some things I've referred to, and I've listed those resources at the end of the presentation. So here is a list of those resources that I actually talked about, including the LCD for the Category 3 codes, the NCD on the leadless pacemakers, and the NCD for routine costs in clinical trials. And before we go to questions, I just want to let you know time is almost out. So we're at the 30th of December. So you have until tomorrow to decide if you are going to be participating in Medicare for 2026. In the speaker notes, you're going to find some advantages to participating listed there. But for time's sake, if you're currently participating in Medicare and you're going to continue to participate, there's nothing you need to do. However, if you are participating and plan not to participate in 2026, you have to act now. Or if you're not participating and you plan to participate, you have to act now. There's a link on this slide that's going to take you to the CMS website so you can review the annual Medicare participation announcement in full. And I'm also going to place a link to the CMS website for the CMS 1832F revisions to payment policies under the Medicare physician fee schedule. That's final rule. We put that in the chat right now. You can link out to that. And just know that we're going to have those fees available on our website as well if they're not already out there. All right. And so that takes us to the Q&A section of today's call. I'm going to just take a quick peek at some of my pre-submitted questions, make sure I've got all of those answered. Some were specific to codes, which we're not really going to cover. Do you know if the 2026 physician fee schedule will be released before the end of the year? You should be able to, Daniel, find those in that link that I sent you to the final rule. And if they're not on our website, they should be very soon. Usually Tuesday and Wednesday are our posting days. So I haven't checked the website yet today, but if they're not there, you know, hopefully they will be there in the next couple of days. They're not on WPS's website. Okay, you'll keep watching on there today. So yeah, hopefully in the next several days they will be there. But otherwise you can use that link to the final rule. It just takes a little bit of digging through that. And that's why I like to send people to our website if they can. Let's see. And then I'm not seeing any other questions about Category 3 codes. And again, those pricings will be made by us if they're not already analog. So again, that's why with the Category 3 codes, and that this was just one of the pre-submitted questions, why we request review, because we have to look at the documentation, determine the correct code, and then if that code has not been analog for pricing, then determine that pricing as well. And then once we've seen the code and review it, you know, a lot, then we have a crosswalk or an analog to those payments for that, but we will put those on for you. And then we've gone over documentation, and I am not seeing anything else in the pre-submitted or in the chat submitted questions. So in the interest of time and to get you off the webinar a few minutes early, I'm gonna proceed. And if you still have a question, you can go ahead and place it into the chat. And I'll stop and look once again before we conclude. So on your screen now, information about a survey. We value your opinion. We want to hear from you on how we did on this event. So this survey for this event only takes a few minutes to complete. And since we still have time within this webinar, I do hope you complete it during the time that you have etched out for being in this webinar. And that's why I want to give you the opportunity to take it now. Jennifer did put a link to it in the chat, but once we close this webinar, you're going to automatically be redirected. And a box is going to come up, or a page is going to come up, and it's going to look like this. And this is just WebEx's way of telling you we're redirecting you to the survey for this event. I do encourage you to take it. It lets us know not only how we did for this event, but it's your opportunity to tell us what your additional educational needs are. So if you take it for no other reason, take it for that. Tell us what you want. Tell us what other kind of education that we can bring out to you that may be valuable to you. And I'll take one more look, and I don't see any additional questions in the chat. So finally, if you think of any questions regarding this event, you can email those to us. That email address is located in the notes section of your PowerPoint. Go ahead and send those within the next week. Please remember, don't send any PHI or PII via email. And Jennifer, even Dr. Shamey, none of us have access to the claims processing system. So if you need to find out information on a specific claim that you have billed, you are going to have to take those questions to customer service. So remember, check the notes section of the slide deck for any additional information you may want to know. On behalf of Jennifer, Dr. Shaming, and myself, as well as all of our policy department, we want to thank you for your participation in today's event. I want to wish you a happy and safe new year, and this concludes our webinar, and you may now disconnect.